So, hi everyone, welcome to Freedom FANatics. This is a production of the Freedom Advocacy Network, and my name is Sholan. And this week I'm joined by Simpe, who is an analyst at the Center for Risk Analysis, and Gerbrandt, who is a first-time guest and the deputy head of research at the Center for Risk Analysis. So, Simpe, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Simpe. And Gerbrandt, how does it feel being a first-time guest on the show today?
I feel honored. I feel excited. I am ready.
That's great. So this week our focus essentially on Freedom Fanatics will be on South Africa's education system, and we'll be discussing some of its successes and failures. So I think we're gonna get straight into it. Simpe, I'll start with you. So not a lot of people know that South Africa's education sector makes up a major part of government spending. So essentially, my question to you is: what is the education budget in South Africa, and how does it compare to other countries in the world?
Sure. So the education budget, as you say, is enormous in South Africa, and it is one of the biggest globally. So last year, the overall education budget was last year. Let me just check my figures. It was over 400 billion, and for this year, it is estimated to be close to 450 billion, and the majority of that budget goes to the basic education sector. And so last year we saw that it was just over 300 billion, and this year it's expected to be around 316 billion rand.
Sure.
And so when we compare this with more, with other countries that have more developed economies, we see that South Africa is still ranking pretty high. Based on World Bank estimates, on a global scale, the average of public spending on education is around 14.3%, and South Africa's is nearly 20%. So you can see the gap there. And once you take that further and start to examine the outcomes thereof, you see that South Africa is spending all this money, yet it's not translating into good quality outcomes. And so, this is the education illusion in South Africa. We spend so much money, but the outcomes are not as they should be.
Yeah, and that's a good segue actually to my next question, which is directed to Gerbrandt, because as you say, Simpe, there's large sums of money being spent on our education system, and it continues to surprise me that we still see a lack of facilities. We see children dying in pit toilets in some regions of the country, which is horrific. I'm like, so where is this money actually going to? And that's what my question for you, Gerbrandt, is: have the resources which are allocated to our education system actually resulted into good education outcomes?
I think the short answer is no. As Simpe has described for us now, we spend all this money. We actually spend more money on education, twice as much percentage-wise, than Japan and Spain and other developed markets. Yet their educational outcomes are much higher than ours. And I think I'll refer to our throughput rate just to show you how dire the situation is. So from the 2018 grade 10 class, only 56%, little more than a half, actually make it to Matric in 2022. Of that original grade 10 cohort, only 40% managed to pass Matric managed to pass Matric, that is, and then only 20% of the original grade 10 class managed to pass Matric well enough in order to get university entrance. And 12% of those, managed to pass maths, the very important subject, as we all know. And I think what's also very indicative of how poor our schooling system is the growth in private or independent schools. Whenever you see a high rate of privatization, that is indicative of failing state institutions. I think between 2000 and 2022, the number of independent schools increased by 130%, whereas the number of state schools actually declined. We actually have less state schools now than we did a few years ago. And yeah, I think what's also a big problem here is because we have such poor quality schools, having a matric certificate doesn't mean that much anymore today. That is why we see such huge emphasis on university education and tertiary degrees, because that has become the only avenue to employment. In fact, those who have a tertiary degree are actually twice as likely to find a job than those with only a matric certificate. And not everyone can go to university, and that is one of the big reasons why we've seen high unemployment rates in this country existing for decades. And that's also one of the main reasons why we've seen so much instability at universities with the hashtag fees must fall movement, because not everybody can afford going to university, but that has become the only way to actually find a way to carve out a career for yourself that is sustainable. So all in all, South Africa has a very, very, very poor education system, and yet not much is being done about that. You don't see the government actually proposing, good plans in order to improve the education system. They always talk about, the big problems are, white monopoly capital. We need more transformation policies. We need land expropriation without compensation, all these other types of policies. But one of the biggest problems that we face, the government is simply not addressing, never talking about, is education.
Yeah, absolutely. And simply speaking, something that Gerbrandt touched on was, the outcomes that we actually like the fact that many matrics who actually even get matric, they are not necessarily absorbed into the economy. Like they aren't actually contributing to the economy and not actually employed. That's why we experience such high unemployment rates. So that's directing towards my question for you essentially. What can we expect from those who are actually but have matriculated, and we have our matric results coming up later this week, if I remember correctly. What can we expect from these matric results, especially since there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the release of the results?
Yeah. Sholan, so this week we hopefully will be seeing the results. We're also waiting anxiously as much as the students to see these results. And this year's results are coming out 2 weeks later than they usually do. So I think there's quite a lot of pressure on the matrics of 2021, and I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say exactly what could play out, but based off of historical trends and the performance and output of students who sit down for their matric or their national senior certificate exam, is that there's a decline in the output when you look at the level of achievement. So this is always expressed in this type of the level of your pass that you achieve going out, and the highest being a bachelor's degree, which allows you university entrance, and then it goes lower and lower. Fewer students are qualifying for university once they're leaving school, and the pupils passing at like 40% and above would achieve a higher certificate, and even that diploma, even that proportion is declining. And we see this trend particularly in the years between 2015 and 2020. So I do not have very high expectations that the overall pass rate this year will be higher than last year's cohort, in particular, the previous cohort. I think that we can assume that is a given. And I think we will also see a disparity between wealthier schools and the underfunded rural schools. At the CRA we use quintiles, which is a school poverty ranking system, and when we look at quintile schools, we see that we can really tell the difference between we can almost anticipate a student's performance based on their socioeconomic background. So students from quintile 1 schools, which are the poorest, are likely to fail maths 6 times more likely to fail maths than pupils from quintile 5 schools, which are wealthier ones. And so I think we're going to see a greater gap this year. And that's also especially given to the fact that this matric class has lived through nearly 2 years of COVID. And in their grade 11 year, a lot of schools lost teaching time. And I think the schools that are affected are the poorest again, because they don't have access to internet connection and laptops and so on. And so their schooling didn't happen once COVID regulations didn't allow for students to come into school. And the government's been telling us that particular class, the grade 11 class of last year, of 2020, lost half of their school year. They were not in school for half of the year. And so you can just imagine the grade gaps that we're going to see. I think we'll also see a smaller proportion of students actually sitting down for the school exams. I mean, you have the candidates, you have the NSC candidates, and then you have the candidates that actually sit down for the matric exams. And you'll see, I think, a greater dropout rate this year.
Yeah, and Simpe, I just want to ask a quick question on the quintile system that you spoke of. So would it be right to assume that the majority of the schools in the the more wealthier schools tend to be more private schools than public education facilities? Okay.
Definitely.
Cool. Yeah, and as Simpe said, Gerbrandt, things are going on a downward spiral and it's not looking good. And my question to you essentially is, what can be done by not only our government leaders, but community leaders as well, to improve this situation and actually turn things around?
Yeah, I think one proposal that the Institute of Race Relations has come up with a few years ago, which I think is fantastic, is education voucher system. So what is currently happening in South Africa is that you tend to find your good private schools and your former Model C schools in the suburbs, and a lot of the schools in the township areas and in much poorer areas tend to not have enough resources, funds, or enough qualified staff. So a lot of those parents really want to have their children go to private schools or Model C former Model C schools, but those types of schools come with a price. And that's, of course, out of reach for the majority of parents in this country. And so what the RR proposed with their education voucher system is that, we spend billions and billions of rands on teacher salaries in this country. But some of the money there can be used can be channeled to this education voucher system. So you can, for example, have a voucher in the form of a smart card with a few thousand rand on it. And then you give that to parents, especially parents who don't have a lot of income. And then they are financially empowered to take their children to much better off schools. And not only will that benefit parents and their children, but it will also create competition in the market. Because I think what is necessary in the education system here in South Africa is a bit more competition. So when poor performing schools actually start noticing that they are losing pupils to schools in the suburbs to private schools, they will then have the incentive as well to up their game and to perform better and provide better quality education. Then I would also just briefly want to mention some other factors that I think we could improve on. Firstly, I think the influence of the South African Democratic Trade Union, SATU, has been very destructive in the last few years. They often embark on strikes, which disrupt schools and education. And of course, pupils are the biggest victims of those strikes. It has also been known, it has been discovered that SATU has been very influential in appointing certain people. They were actually, I read a few years ago, in schools in KwaZulu-Natal and I think in the Northwest as well, SATU was actually selling posts. They were selling teacher posts, principal posts. I mean, that is cadre deployment right there and corruption right there. So SATU has allowed not the right people to enter schools and to play very important parts in those schools. And we all know that principals play a huge role in the success of a school. And so I've also read in an article once that there have been a few principals who were threatened with violence to leave their posts so that somebody else can buy their post for 30,000 Rand or 11,000 Rand. It's incredible what sometimes happens in this country. So the influence of SATU needs to be lessened, and there should be more decision-making power be given to school governing bodies or SGBs. School governing bodies, of course, consist of teachers, but also primarily of parents and pupils. And these are parents and pupils who then have a say in how their school is run. And if you give SGBs the power to appoint their own principal, I mean, that can go a far way to improve the function of that school. Of course, appointments based on merit should also feature highly. I think also to realize that just throwing money at the problem, like our government currently is doing, I mean, that's not the way to improve things. There's a lot of different factors that need attention, which I think have been neglected in these last few years.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was extremely informative, guys. We have reached the end of this episode now. Thank you, Gerbrandt. Thank you, Simpe, for making the time and being here with us and, enlightening us a bit about South Africa's education system. And so don't forget to catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, IGTV, Facebook, YouTube, at Badge of Liberty. And to join FAN, you can support our fight for freedom at freedomadvocacy.net. And remember, guys, that your freedom is always worth fighting for.